Okay, let's talk about today's business matters. Uber is in for another bumpy ride, it looks like, with the FTC. So the Federal Trade Commission is suing the ride-hailing company over its Uber One subscription. The agency claims that Uber signed up some of its users without their knowledge and made deceptive claims about the service. Now, Uber is saying that it is disappointed by the move and is confident that the courts will see Uber One's sign-up and cancellation process are clear and that they follow the law. Meanwhile, as the world's largest producer of three key minerals, China is blocking the market. Antimony, germanium, and gallium are vital to clean energy, chip making, as well as defense. So China issued export controls on these three metals. And since then, new data is showing that exports are down and some buyers have been cut out of the supply chain, like the United States, for example. And the trend has raised questions about how many export licenses China will approve for the 7 rare earth elements on its control list. It has also forced exporters to source materials elsewhere. This has only pushed prices higher, which in turn supports prices in China. Now, investors are also scooping up gold and have raised it to record levels. This comes as President Trump has threatened to fire the head of the Federal Reserve, and his tariffs have created economic uncertainty. Now, in response, gold futures jumped to a record $3,400 per ounce this morning. Gold has climbed 30% since the start of the year and nearly 10% since President Trump unveiled his sweeping tariffs. A White House official says the president is also looking into whether he can fire Fed Chair Jerome Powell. Meanwhile, a hearing got underway today in the last phase of an antitrust case against Google. A federal judge ruled last summer that Google had broken antitrust laws to keep its dominance in online search. The Justice Department is proposing a breakup of the $1.8 trillion company that is Google. It's suggesting a spin-off of its Chrome web browser, which drives traffic to its search engine. Now, if the remedies do not bring back competition, the Justice Department is proposing Google sell off its Android operating system. The Justice Department also told the judge she should ensure that Google is not able to use its search monopoly to create a similar dominance in artificial intelligence. Google has said it's going to appeal being ruled a monopoly, but has to wait until this final phase of the trial is completed. First, it was red dye, now the rest. The Trump administration has announced plans to pull artificial food dyes from the nation's food supply. Now, in January, under the Biden administration, the FDA banned red dye number 3 in food, beverages, and ingested drugs. Red dye number 3, number 40, and blue number 2, as well as green number 3. They all have been linked to cancer or tumors in animals. More details are expected to be shared tomorrow. HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and U.S. Food and Drug Administration Commissioner Marty McCary. A second Boeing jet intended for use by a Chinese airline was tracked heading back to the U.S. It appears to be another victim of tariff tensions. Now, a spokesperson for Xiamen Airlines confirmed that 2 planes marked for the carrier had gone to the U.S., but it had declined to provide a reason. And on this topic earlier, I discussed the Boeing jet flying back to the U.S. with Steve Yates. He's a senior research fellow for China and national security at the Heritage Foundation. Take a look. What is the return of this Boeing jet signal? Is it significant?
Well, it is one of the arrows in the People's Republic of China's quiver in terms of major companies with political influence in the United States that have a significant economic exposure with regard to sales to China. The United States sells far less to China than China sells back to the United States. And so in terms of this tariff confrontation and negotiation that's been underway, the access to the U.S. Consumer market is by far the biggest point of leverage. But from China's point of view, their largest leverage is trying to get these big companies, the short list of them that have significant sales into China, and Boeing's top of that list.
So I'm just thinking whether this was a business decision or perhaps a political one. So taking into consideration the tariffs as well, what do you think?
Well, I would always consider that it might have been a business decision, but in the context of everything that's going on, it's hard to take the politics out of this. There's been so much very blunt rhetoric from the Foreign Ministry of China, the Ministry of Commerce, and other sources out of the People's Republic of China, suggesting that they have every intention to use their leverage back against the United States to put pressure on the U.S. to back away, where the U.S. administration is somewhat responding to the signals from China and saying we have to take some of these adjustments to our manufacturing supply chains and tariffs and other kinds of tools because we have to rebalance as China's become more aggressive in their support for the war in Ukraine, the support for the Yemeni attacks in that region, and of course, aggressive territorial claims in the Indo-Pacific. All that means that we have to make adjustments, and China seems to be playing some political war back using Boeing potentially as a point of vulnerability.
Okay, so let me get this straight. You're saying it's potentially possible, it's entirely possible that the Chinese Communist Party actually stepped in and pressured Xiamen Airlines to return the Boeing jet back to the United States?
Well, they don't purchase things from Boeing unless there's been some kind of big American and Chinese government engagement. It used to be that every time there was a leader summit of any consequence, there was a signing ceremony for these commercial aircraft to go from the United States into China. It was big, big business for decades. And so if it had been a part of the negotiations between heads of state for decades, it seems very, very plausible the pullback of this would also have been related to the relations between leaders of the states.
Are the U.S. and China on a path of decoupling in trade?
I think China has been pushing the decoupling for the better part of a decade. It's accelerated in recent times. I view a lot of what the Trump administration has been doing as a response to some of this more aggressive posture the People's Republic has taken under Xi Jinping. And if you just look at what's been done in recent weeks, the escalation, the attempt to go to Southeast Asia, the declaration that others should not make agreements with the United States unless they are agreeable to Beijing as well. This is kind of wolf warrior in the economic space, very aggressive, I think somewhat defensive on China's part, but it doesn't show signs of coming to the negotiating table. Ultimately, that's what they need to do very soon, or they stand to lose more economically than the United States does, in my estimation.
All right, Steve, that's our time today. And again, thank you very much for having this conversation with us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
A whopping $240 million. That's about how much President Trump's inaugural committee raised for his second swearing in. So Sunday marked 90 days since the event, which is the legal deadline for the committee to disclose donations over $200 to the Federal Election Commission. While there are no legal limits for donations, the committee is not allowed to accept any foreign contributions. So the single largest donation, which is $5 million, came from Colorado-based poultry company Pilgrim's Pride. The report reveals that some of the most generous donors are now part of the Trump administration. Big companies also made major contributions. For example, Meta and Amazon each donated $1 million. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen told Politico the EU is determined to enforce its full digital rule book no matter who is in charge of tech companies or where they're based. The EU uses the rules as a list of do's and don'ts for tech giants aimed at securing a level playing field and giving consumers more choices. So President Trump has strongly criticized those rules. In February, Trump signed a memorandum warning that his administration would scrutinize the EU's Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act that, quote, dictates how American companies interact with consumers in the European Union. So a decision on whether Apple and Meta have breached the EU tech rules is expected in the coming weeks. The new tariffs are tipping the scales in the competition between some rival companies. American firms that hedged their bets by keeping some manufacturing inside the U.S. are now gaining an advantage. Such is the case in the rivalry between Coke and Pepsi. NTD Shar Marshall has more on how the tariffs are impacting the cola wars.
Coke versus Pepsi. Two rivals, usually pretty balanced, but one side wasn't ready for the tariff war. According to the Wall Street Journal, PepsiCo was already losing the cola war, and now it's also become a casualty of the tariff war. The reason? The company makes the concentrate for its U.S. sales of Pepsi and Mountain Dew in Ireland. It's been doing this for the past 50 years because of Ireland's low corporate tax rate, which is much lower than in the U.S. Coca-Cola, on the other hand, produces the concentrate for its U.S. sales in Puerto Rico and Atlanta. The result, Pepsi's concentrate is now subject to a 10% tariff, while Coke's is not. President Trump is set to meet with representatives from major retailers on Monday afternoon to discuss the effects of broad-based tariffs on the businesses. A White House official confirmed a Bloomberg report that said the meeting will include representatives from Walmart, Home Depot, Lowe's, and Target. Walmart confirmed that CEO Doug McMillon would be at the meeting. Home Depot, Lowe's, and Target did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Big U.S. retailers, particularly Walmart and Target, import a high percentage of their goods from overseas, and the tariffs, including 145% levies on China, could boost the cost for everyday consumers for Americans in the coming months. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
And we also have some news about shipping giant DHL. It has announced that it's suspending shipments worth $800 or more to private individuals in the U.S., and that is starting today. So it's saying that the move is due to changes in U.S. customs rules. And the German company said it was experiencing multi-day delays to the U.S. for such shipments and is suspending them until further notice. Shipments under that amount are not affected. However, DHL says business packages more than $800 will not be impacted, but may face some delays. Customs officials began requiring formal entry processing of items worth more than $800 on April 5th, which is down from $2,500. Meanwhile, a nonprofit is hoping to make the environment cleaner year-round through its Buy Nothing project. Here's how it works and why it could save you some money.
Millions of tons of waste end up in landfills every year in the U.S., according to the Environmental Protection Agency. The EPA estimates Americans throw out about 5 pounds of trash every day, and that doesn't even include the garbage that ends up in our oceans.
We found that there were a lot of plastics washing ashore with every single high tide.
Liesl Clark was living in Bainbridge Island, Washington, when she noticed just how much trash was ending up on their shores and wanted to do something about it. In 2013, she and her friend Rebecca Rockefeller launched a local Facebook group where neighbors could reuse and share items.
Post here and say what you're going to the store to buy and see if your neighbor might have it.
It's called the Buy Nothing Project. Clark says it's grown to 12 million users in communities all over the world. Here's how it works. Communities create a private Buy Nothing Facebook group just for people who live in that area. That's where you can post items you no longer need, blenders, kids' rocking chairs, clothes, and see if one of your neighbors wants it, like this person who's giving away picture frames. If you're interested, you comment on the post and coordinate the exchange. Those items don't end up in the trash, and it helps a neighbor save money.
There is a power in togetherness and sharing.
You can also ask neighbors for items you're looking for, like this parent who wants a bike for her daughter. Multiple neighbors responding, offering their old bikes.
They're connecting with their neighbors. They come for the stuff. They stay for the community.
That community connection seen through posts like this one. A parent giving away this stroller that she says she received and enjoyed from this group and now wants to pay it forward.
And get this, South Korean authorities are saying that they found Chinese products disguised as made in Korea. So the country's customs agency says it's seeing an increase in attempts to bypass U.S. tariffs this way.
As South Korea is geographically close to China, we believe there are many cases that goods from China go through South Korea for disguised export attempts. In addition, Southeast Asian countries may also seek to route shipments through South Korea, and we see a growing risk of such cases occurring in those regions as well.
And just adding to that, the Korea Customs Service said it found more than $20 million worth of violations in just the first quarter of 2025. And 97% were heading to the U.S. A Korean customs official says the agency plans to strengthen preventative measures. Meanwhile, a special task force has been launched to develop more targeted responses aimed at protecting domestic companies. South Korea is planning to hold trade talks this week with the U.S. Seoul's trade ministry said yesterday the country's finance and trade ministers will meet U.S. Trade Representative Jamison Greer and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. And South Korea is hoping to negotiate President Trump's 25% tariff. It's currently capped at 10%, but only for a 90-day period. South Korea will be one of the first countries to negotiate with the U.S. over Trump's new tariffs. Chipotle is packing up its burritos and sending them down south. The Tex-Mex chain is hoping to win over customers in Mexico as it enters the latest phase of its international expansion. Take a look.
Chipotle lovers will no longer have to decide between a Chipotle burrito and a trip to Mexico. They can soon have both. The Newport Beach, California company has signed a development deal with Alsea. This company runs chains like Starbucks, Domino's, and Burger King in Latin America and Europe. After decades focusing on the U.S. market, Chipotle has made a push for international expansion. Chipotle has about 60 locations in Canada, 20 in the UK, 3 in Kuwait, and 2 in the United Arab Emirates. Its first location for Mexico is scheduled to open early next year. The move comes as President Trump has paused the tariff on Mexico that would put a 25% tariff on avocados. For years, Chipotle has worked to reduce its dependence on avocados from Mexico, but still imports about half from there. The chain is betting on Mexico's familiarity with its ingredients to win over customers. But other U.S.-owned Mexican-inspired restaurants, like Taco Bell, have failed in Mexico.
Let's talk about Airbnb. Making a change to its platform, it's now going to show the total price for your booking, including fees and taxes by default. And this actually marks a change from the default displaying prices based on the nightly rate. Airbnb is saying that this is part of the company's commitment to affordability and transparency. Now, the changes come ahead of new federal regulations about junk fees that are set to go into effect on May 12th. The Federal Trade Commission announced new rules late last year, banning hotels, ticketing, and short-term rental companies from including hidden junk fees in their total. All right, let's talk about markets. U.S. stocks fell sharply today, with the S&P 500, NASDAQ, and Dow all dropping over 2%. And this is driven partly because of anxiety from investors over President Trump's criticism of Fed Chair Jerome Powell, and as well as due to escalating U.S.-China trade tensions. So the tech-heavy NASDAQ was hit the hardest. It's dragged down by losses in major growth stocks, including Nvidia, which slipped on reports that Huawei plans to ship a rival AI chip. But despite the turbulence, earnings season is heating up with major companies like Tesla, Alphabet, and Boeing set to report. And so far, 68% of early results have beaten expectations. And with that, everything on today's Business Matters.